Good morning. I would like to call this March 20th Planning and Advisory Commission meeting to order. If you'll please stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have not signed in, it is really important that you make sure you have signed in at the front. And also, I'm going to ask that you have your cell phones turned off or silenced, because this is filmed and we would appreciate not hearing phones ring. All right, we're going to start. We have two cases, so we're going to start with our first case, which is well, you know what? I'm jumping right into this thing. Hang on a minute, y'all. Let me back up and tell you what we're doing. I'm just assuming everybody knows what we're doing. So this is just to remind the audience and those watching television that this is the first hearing of any rezoning, text change, or special exception request brought before us today. Now, I say that, however, we do have a case that is coming before us for a second time. We will first hear the reading of the staff report for the case by the planning staff, and then we will ask the applicant to provide a brief overview of the request. We will first hear a reading. We will then give the opportunity for anyone in the audience to speak for or against the request or to inquire about the said request. The commissioners will have any needed discussion in the case, and once a motion is made and seconded by the commission, a vote will take place and a recommendation will be rendered. The case will go back to the planning department for their independent recommendation, and if a favorable recommendation is given, then the case is forwarded to the City Council with two independent recommendations. If the planning department makes a recommendation for denial, the applicant will have 10 days from the receipt of a letter stating the denial in order to notify the clerk of council that they are requesting to be placed on the City Council's agenda. The City Council of Columbus will hold a public meeting, a first reading, and then the said council shall consider the case, review PAC and Planning Department recommendations, and hear discussion on the matter. The council will make a final decision at a second meeting, which is called the second reading. We do have minutes from the March 6th meeting, and commissioners, those were all sent out to you all. You had an opportunity to take a look at them, and we can accept them as submitted unless anyone has a change to any of those. Anyone? No? All right, so we will accept those as submitted. So now we're going to get to our first case, which is REZN-02-19-0274. And this is a request to rezone 0.36 acres of land located at 5381 Veterans Parkway. The current zoning is NC, which is neighborhood commercial, and the proposed zoning is GC, which is general commercial. The proposed use is a tattoo parlor. Michael Wright is the applicant, and this property is located in Council District 8, Garrett. Mr. Renfro.
Yes, ma'am. The general land use is inconsistent for planning area F. Current land use designation is general commercial. Future is light manufacturing industrial. It is compatible with the existing land uses. The property does not lie within the floodway and floodplain area. The developer will need an approved drainage plan prior to an issuance of a site development permit if a permit is required. Property is served by all city services. The ITE trip generator manual does not have a trip rate for a tattoo parlor nor a similar rate that can be used for this particular use. The site shall meet the codes and regulations of the Columbus Consolidated Government for commercial usage. There will be no school impact, no buffer requirements, no response from Fort Benning, and no DRI recommendation. 19 property owners within 300 feet of the subject's property were notified of the rezoning request. The planning department received no phone calls or emails regarding the rezoning. There's no additional information.
All right, commissioners, are there any questions regarding the staff report? Mr. Kinner.
Excuse me. During the review session, the staff provided information for us. And I just want to put on the public record Mr. Johnson's response to us relative to the seeming disconnect between the current land uses and the present zoning. This is just for clarification for the public record.
Thank you, Mr. Kenner. When the county and the city consolidated in, I guess by the time all the work was done, 72, C2 was the general commercial for the county, C3 was general commercial for the city. Well, when they consolidated, they just left them as is, even though the C2 of the county became what the city considered neighborhood commercial. Stayed that way. There wasn't really a dime's worth of difference between the two until the Unified Development Ordinance was adopted in 2005. At that point, C2 converted to NC neighborhood commercial, which is a true neighborhood commercial use. Well, along a lot of these major arterials like Manchester and Veterans that were in the county, it converted a lot of those properties to neighborhood commercial use when they're fully regional and commercial type commercial activities. Community commercial activities. So as uses have come along that are not compatible with the use size or the use of the property, folks have been rezoning for the last 15 years or so. Properties in these, and Macon Road, these three specific areas from NC to GC.
Thank you.
All right. So do we have any other questions, Commissioners, for staff? No? All right. If the applicant is here, if you'll please come forward and state your name and address and give us any brief overview or additional information.
Good morning. Michael Wright, 6823 Whitesville Road. Thank you, Will. He pretty much hit the nail on the head. The only thing that I'd like to add is there would be no construction needing, no permits needed for site. Everything's staying the same there as far as the building that's there. Interior, there might be some building permits to change the interior, but also if you were to look at a map of the general commercial, actually those properties that neighbor it, right behind it, also beside it, are already general commercial. I would anticipate there's probably going to be some more properties in that general area that'll change from neighborhood to general commercial, but some have already done so, and that's it.
Commissioners, are there any questions for the applicant? I don't see anything. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor of this request? And I see none. Anyone who would like to speak in opposition? No? Do I hear a motion? Mr. Reese.
Madam Chair, as it relates to matter REZN 02190274, request to rezone .36 acres of land located at 5381 Veterans Parkway. And based upon the staff report of being in compliance, I move that we approve the request.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Mr. Bollinger. All right. So all those in favor, please raise your right hand. It is unanimous. So that will pass with a recommendation for approval. Thank you. All right. That brings us to our next case, which is REZN-01-19-0007. And this is a request for a text amendment to amend the text of the Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO, in regards to Table 3.1.1 and create Section 3.2.73, Health and Fitness Facility. Mr. Renfro.
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me. This is a request to amend the text of the UDO in regards to Table 3.1, health and fitness facilities, to read as follows. Amend Table 3.1 by permitting health and fitness facilities with a special exception in the historic district, and then create Section 3.2.73 regarding health and fitness facility, which are the health and fitness facility located in the historic zoning district shall not be permitted outright as a principal use. Said use shall meet the following criteria to be considered for a special exception use as provided in Section 3.1.1 and Section 10.2.7. Letter A, a health and fitness facility shall be required to occupy a building that encompasses 15,000 square feet or more of gross floor area. A health and fitness facility shall only be permitted in an existing structure built prior to 2019. A health and fitness facility shall be required to meet the parking standards of the UDO as referenced in 4.3, off-street parking and loading. As far as additional information, a map was sent out. There would the qualifications to meet that. There would be 7 buildings, and I can read those addresses off if you would like. 800 Front Avenue, 18 9th Street, 710 Front Avenue, 627 Second Avenue, 543 Third Avenue, 222 Fifth Street, and 425 Third Avenue.
Thank you.
That's it.
Commissioners, any questions for the staff report? Mr. Brennan?
In addition to the square footage, do you know how many of the buildings meet the off-street parking requirements of those 7 addresses you mentioned?
No, I do not.
Mr. Dudley?
Following up on that, though, isn't it the case, the way this is written, that even if they don't meet the parking standards now, they could make changes to meet them? Because it says that it shall be only permitted in existing structures, but it looks like, the way I read it, it shall be required to meet the parking standards, but that doesn't say that must meet parking standards currently. So it seems like that might not be an issue.
Meaning, so the building size might work currently,
Right.
but the parking...
As long as the building size works currently and the parking works at the time of the application.
Correct.
Is
Correct.
how I read this.
Yes,
Yes, that's right.
it is correct.
I had a separate question for staff.
Okay.
Who exactly has submitted this version of the requested amendment? Is it the gym owner or?
It is the
historic?
gym owner.
Okay. Some of the communications we've received have expressed concern that it was not a property owner that has requested this text amendment. Is that an issue for the city? Are non-property owners allowed to request text amendments?
Mr. Johnson?
A property is not in question, so anyone can file a text amendment to change any use.
Okay, thank you.
It's when it comes, if this is approved, then the special exception, if approved, would have to be signed by a property owner because it's property specific. Text amendment is not property specific.
Thank you.
Anyone in this room can file one.
Commissioners, any other questions regarding the staff report? All right. If the applicant will, am I calling for the applicant? No, I'm not calling for the applicant, am I? No, I'm not. Okay. So before we get started, many of you were here a couple of weeks ago or a month ago when we had this, and this is the point where I call and ask for anyone in the audience who would like to speak in favor or against this request. And I just want to remind you of the rules that we have here for that. This is an important issue for many of you. We have heard from a lot of you, but what we are not going to do is hear from every single one of you today. I ask always if there is a group spokesperson for the in favor or opposed, and if there is, that's great. That spokesperson can come forward when called. Otherwise, it's going to be random, and I'll call someone up here. But you all cannot come up individually unless you are going to tell us something that person has not said. We're not going to sit here and hear, I'm opposed, or I'm opposed, or I'm opposed, or I'm in favor, I'm in favor, I'm in favor. So just want to make that really clear. So saying that, is there a group spokesperson for the group that is in favor? Is there a group spokesperson? Okay. So raise your hand if you would like to come forward to speak in favor. All right. Mr. Green, if you'll come forward and state your name and address, and then give us a brief overview of the in favor stance.
Good morning. My name is Fred Green, and I live at 745 Broadway and own 2 other structures within the historic district. This is a tough issue for our neighborhood, as y'all know. I do, however, feel that certainly the use where the current gym is appropriate. And I feel like the things that have been put into the text amendment give some protection to those that are opposed. A lot of what I heard going into this issue is, oh my God, they can buy the house next door to me and put a gym in. Well, with this verbiage, that can't happen. So I think it affords many of those that are opposed, while it may not have changed their mind, some protections, and I'm grateful for that.
Commissioners, do any of you have any questions for Mr. Green? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Green, speaking on behalf of those who are in favor, is there anyone who is in favor of this that is going to tell us something completely different than what we just heard? Mrs. Williams. If you'll state your name and address and give us a brief overview.
Good morning. Kathy Williams, 731 First Avenue in the Historic District. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to let the PAC members know that many years ago now, I was on the original UDO committee when we looked at all of the restrictions that we wanted to put in place in zoning. We paid particular attention to the historic district, and I was not a resident of the historic district at the time. But I remember a long period of time, weeks, that we discussed it. What was the historic district striving to become, and what were they at the time? We understood that the historic district was something very unique within our community. It was very special. And part of its specialness was its difference. We seem to have moved towards being a more exclusive neighborhood, and that's fine if that's what the neighbors want. But the UDO committee put in place the special exception rule for exactly this reason, because we recognize that any zoning classification should not exclude everything. And we did not know what the future held. We did not know what the historic district or any area would become. So we allowed for special exceptions so that this body and the neighbors could have input in the future of their community. The special exception rule protects private property rights in that it allows a private property owner to say, I think now this is a good use of this property. Of course, it's up to you to determine that, but this is not opening zoning for a historic district for health and spas and what yoga studios or anything. It's very specific with the compromise that was so appropriate to put into the special stipulation for the special exemption for the historic district, in that it narrows it down to this use for this address. That's what the UDO committee originally intended for the special exemption rule. It was put into place to allow for this community to consider what may be correct today and not 30 years ago when we started talking about this. I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you. Sit tight for a second. Commissioners, are there any questions for Mrs. Williams before she takes her seat? No.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else who wants to speak in favor, reminding you that we need to hear something different? Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak in opposition, or is there a group spokesperson for the opposition side? Yes, ma'am, if you'll come forward and state your name and address for us, please.
Good morning. My name is Fran Carpenter, and I live at 738 Broadway. I appreciate what the planning department has tried to do to try to make this a very restrictive zoning change. I appreciate what Kathy and Fred have said. I do think that we're closer to a comfort level with this situation than we were in the beginning. But I guess I sort of wonder about the process. I understand that zoning should be fluid, perhaps, and that what you did 30 years ago may not stand today. However, I don't think that changing zoning should be done as a knee-jerk response to solve a problem, and that's what this has felt like. A problem arose. I don't know how it arose. I don't care how it arose, really. But we're making a change to a one-of-a-kind neighborhood in order to accommodate a problem. And I think a lot of us, that's really our concern here. It's fine if we need to look at the UDO for our neighborhood, but let's do that in a thoughtful and reasoned way with input from everybody in the neighborhood instead of just making a decision, let's see what we can come up with to solve this problem. And I think that's a major concern for a lot of us. In addition, the definition of health and fitness facility seems very broad and very vague to a lot of us. I presume that you all have a definition of what health and fitness facility is.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
are very familiar with it. But, I mean, it even includes the serving of alcohol. I don't think that we understand how that figures into a health and fitness facility. And so, if you choose to move forward with this, we would like for you to take a hard look at the definition of a health and fitness facility and perhaps tighten that up a little bit. And by all means, get rid of the serving of alcohol in a health and fitness facility. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Commissioners, are there any questions for Mrs. Carpenter? Mr. Dudley?
Setting aside the specific case here, for the text amendment as a whole, it seems like the opponents are arguing that no health and fitness facility should be allowed. There shouldn't be the possibility. But there has been a yoga studio in the historic district for 2 or 3 years now. Have there been any negative effects of that on the neighborhood?
Not that I'm aware of. Most of us probably, or many of us probably didn't even know that it was there and operating. A yoga studio is, in a very small space, is also a very quiet pursuit. It's not a noisy activity. And we don't know how it got there. And it's not, again, it's really not about this particular facility. It's about changing the UDO to allow for development in a neighborhood as a response to a problem. It's not, I just don't, I think planning, by its definition, the word planning, is something that you do in a reasoned and thoughtful way. It's not something that you do as a response to solving a problem. And I think that's our concern. I also, and I'm sorry, I know I said I was through, but you know, the application from the planning department for a text amendment asks a lot of questions about how the particular text amendment applies to the comprehensive plan. And we've not heard anything here today that talks about that. And I really would like to, I mean, if we're going to move forward, if you're going to move forward, let's hear how that applies to the comprehensive plan going forward for our neighborhood and for our city.
Mr. Kenner, sorry.
Excuse my voice this morning. Let's say, ma'am, I'm going to pose maybe your question back to you. And I would invite anybody in the room who can respond to my concern to respond to it. Okay. I'm all for entrepreneurship. I was a owner in a private company for many years, and I've waged all the wars for payroll, meeting payroll, and accounts receivable, and all the rest of it. So I fully support entrepreneurship and individual business people. But I do have concerns. I'm very concerned about the process that has led us to this point. Okay. It has to do with the certificate of occupancy and the operation of a business in the absence of a certificate of occupancy. The building inspector told the lessee on the 4th of October to go to the city and get a certificate of occupancy. The certificate of occupancy was rejected in the week of the 8th of October because it was not consistent with allowed uses in the historic district. Sometime after the week of the 8th of October, I'm not certain when, operations must have started because somebody blew the whistle and called a complaint into the city on the 12th of November. Operations apparently continued in the facility until at least the 3rd of December, when a city special enforcement person went to the facility to tell them they had to get an occupancy permit. That finally resulted in a city council meeting on the 11th of December, and a PAC meeting, and another council meeting, and today. Okay? So in summary, in my opinion, which I'm very concerned about, is business operations continued for weeks without a certificate of occupancy, and the lessee knew about that. okay? That doesn't seem right to me.
Me
So
either.
can somebody answer my question? How did this happen? Why should we be here?
I've
I
been
think
asking
this-
that same question, Mr. Kenner. Thank you for asking.
Mr. Johnson.
And again, this has been addressed. It was determined it was a government facility operated by a state-owned institution. One of the neighbors brought it up. How are they operating there? We told them it's a government facility. She requested that it be forwarded to the city attorney. It was forwarded to the city attorney. He came back with case law and said, yes, it is a government facility. It is exempt from zoning. That neighbor then got with a real estate attorney who looked at the case law closer and countered that he had misinterpreted. So thus, he comes back and says, yes, she's correct. So the problem was in the interpretation of the case law by two different attorneys, and that's why it took so long to work this out over that month-long period.
Just to be clear, though, it sounds as if the occupant was operating under what she believed to be correct direction from government officials.
Yes.
And it wasn't anything intentional to try to deceive the neighborhood.
No.
Or any operational,
And it's
operational
all,
process.
it's all in print. We all have print copies of everything that went forward the whole timeline.
And so just to clear the air on what may have been inferred in a few minutes ago, from your perspective, do you see anything that the current occupant did wrong that we should take into any type of consideration in this decision?
As far as this decision goes, no. There was an issue on the front end with filing for the permit. This is a box. I mean, this is essentially just one big open box. And when the contractor filed the permit, they just filed it as an open box to put in 2 bathrooms. They didn't put a use for it. It would have been caught then. So that's how it all trickled down and got us to where we are here 6 months later.
Mr. Kenner.
The timeline, which was, I attended the public meeting down at the annex a couple of weeks ago. The timeline which the city distributed doesn't talk about the issue of the jurisdiction because of the government ownership and so forth until sometime in November. Okay, so when did this whole issue concerning the jurisdiction of the city versus not jurisdiction of the city arise? It's not mentioned in the timeline until well into November.
No, it's not mentioned in the timeline. The timeline was done by John Hutchison, Director of Codes. When we came in here to the Planning Commission in January, when we got to that slide, I explained what had happened in that month with the emails going back and forth between essentially 2 attorneys. So it's on the record. It's not in that presentation, though.
And
Mr. Reed.
since we have you up here for a point of clarity, and John, you can certainly chime in as well, the list that you listed off earlier of properties, all of those properties are not in the historic district, correct?
No, they are.
All of them are in the historic?
All of those are.
Okay.
Yes,
All
sir.
of those
Okay.
are in, yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Greenblatt.
It's just a point of clarification, and let's go back to the certificate of occupancy. How can a business in Columbus, Georgia operate without a CO?
If they're in a government facility, see, this is where all this
A
confusion is.
government-owned facility.
Dealing with a government facility, they're not required to get a CO.
Okay, I understand that. But once it was determined that it was not a government facility and that you had no jurisdiction, how did that business continue to operate?
Special enforcement went down there and told them to come see us, so I guess on December 3rd. They came down there, filed what they needed to file with zoning, text amendment, whatnot, and then got on the public agenda for council a week later.
But they were still operating. That's your question. I mean, I know what you're
That
asking.
is my question.
You're saying-
That's a question
Yeah.
for codes. I do not know
Right.
what their regulations are.
And that has been a bone of contention, that it was allowed to operate under what the public garners as
Okay, thank you.
inappropriate. But-
Can you tell us how the extension from council fit in this, though? Because didn't council give them a special extension to continue
They've given
operating?
them 2 extensions.
Well, when did the first one transpire? Because it seems like that may clear up some of.
December 11th. They asked, and I've heard some of the folks here in the 4 public meetings we have, why don't they just rezone it CRD? We proposed that and the special exception as two alternatives. Council sent us back with the special exception. So that's how, this is an order from council for us to work through this process, and if it's approved, it's approved, and if it's not, it's not.
And can you just clarify for the public what CRD is?
Central Riverfront District, that's pretty much everything
Yeah,
from the
I just want
river
to make sure we,
to Third Avenue. That's your uptown area
Right.
that you know to be uptown.
okay. I had, any other questions for Mr. Johnson? I'm sorry. Mr. Brandon?
Sure. With regards to the concern about alcohol consumption, because I do see that as a concern to be addressed at least. My cursory reading of city ordinance would be, because that building abuts the Heritage Park, I believe, that you would not be able to get an off or on-premise alcohol license for this location. You
Yes,
can't
within
you can't
200
just start serving alcohol because they would ultimately get the special exception. They would have to go through the alcohol.
They have to apply for a
Process
liquor
as well.
license, and their insurance would actually have to cover them. I know in this case, this gym owner's insurance will not cover her if she serves alcohol.
But, I mean,
But,
that's a
yeah.
business side. This is a.
You got to be
I-
200 feet.
Right.
And they are immediately adjacent to Heritage
You gotta be
Park,
200
which
feet
is
from
a
a city park.
Park. So,
And and the way I read that ordinance, it would be on premise, which
Right.
means you're not a restaurant, so you got to get a liquor license, and then they go out 300 feet, and if you got residential there, and this, that, and the other, personally, you're kind of defeating the purpose of getting a liquor drink if you've been working out all afternoon.
well,
Yeah.
just to me, it seems like it would be specifically on just the park being immediately adjacent to the
Would
building
negate
would
them.
almost instantly preclude this location from being able to get a liquor license, meaning the special exception allowance. Okay, that's great if you can meet all
It's
the other
null and void,
requirements.
yeah.
Right. So they would not be allowed to serve alcohol.
I don't think they would qualify, but, somebody on a fringe might, I don't know.
Sure.
Fourth Street Baptist Church is one of them that would qualify under this. They're not going anywhere. They've been here for 150 years, they're not going anywhere. But, that got put in the UDO in '05, a lot of cutting and pasting, I'm sure from other jurisdictions with your consultants. I don't have any heartburn about it being amended,
Mr.
if
Bollinger?
that's the pursuit y'all are after.
Mr. Bollinger?
The properties right across the street, are they CRD?
No, they're government.
Okay, well,
If they became private, no, they're historic.
Yeah, I was
The underlying zoning is historic.
Yeah.
okay, well, can you explain to us why council made the recommendation for the exception versus rezoning of that one piece of property?
Yeah.
That's just the direction they gave us.
What was the direction of the city attorney? Was that the same?
I mean, he was in the room, yes.
Okay.
I had only had, well, I think we're finished with you for the moment, sorry. I had only had one spokesperson in opposition, so I only had called one time. So I do feel as though I need to say, if there's another member of the audience who wants to speak in opposition, giving us information that we have not heard already. Yes, ma'am, if you'll come forward and state your name and address, and just be aware that we need to hear something we haven't heard yet.
My name is Terry Irvin. I'm at 545 Broadway. And my concern for this particular property is traffic and parking. The applicant for that gym has said that she will have special competitions, which will bring in quite a bit of traffic. Where are they going to park? That's already a congested area. They'll park on 7th Street and 8th Street and all down Front Avenue. We also, right across the street, have the Space Science Center. We have the the Trade Center. So my worry is that what we're doing is much like what's happening on 8th Street, which is very hard to negotiate during business hours, any day of the week, because of a restaurant and the narrowness of those streets. The second question I have has to do with parking. When the map of that area was sent out, the parking lot at that particular facility shows that there is a break. That entire parking lot does not belong, all those places do not belong to that facility, that building. Most of them, in fact, belong to the Trade Center as parking lot number 2. So my question is, are those parking spaces, spaces that can just be appropriated by the patrons of that facility? Or is this something that belongs to the city that would not be getting revenue?
I missed your name, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it's Terry Irvin.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Renfro, I would like for you to address this.
As far as the parking is concerned, while that's relevant, it doesn't pertain necessarily to the text amendment. That would be brought up when a special exception comes forth to see if they actually could meet parking requirements.
I see. The other question has to do generally with the alcohol, because the alcohol issue is not simply for that particular facility.
Correct.
Should another facility on Third or one of the other buildings that is eligible, they could, in fact. And so one of our concerns is that issue, generally, not just simply for this particular
And
facility.
Pat can make the recommendation to amend that definition to exclude the alcohol.
We would appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Renfro, just for a point of clarity, what we're considering today is to amend the text, not to approve a specific case. So once the text is amended, any applicants that desire to be a part of this exception would have to come back and request a special exception. So today, we're only looking at amending the text for the possibility of this special exception if someone comes back later to request that.
Right, that's correct, and like I told her, that's why the traffic and the parking is relevant, but it's not for the text amendment. It would be for the special exception that came
And
after
it is
that.
confusing. It is
Well,
confusing.
Madam Chair, if there are not any more questions, I would like to make a motion.
Well, I think we do have another. Mr. Green? No, you have to be on mic, sorry. You have to be on the mic. Don't start talking until you're on mic. I'm sorry, but we're on live television. It's got to be on mic.
That's okay. I guess I was just sitting there thinking, and I know this does not have to do with the text amendment, but what I've heard is, why would any gym or spa want to sell alcohol? Have y'all ever been to a resort and had a massage? And they give you mimosa while you're waiting to calm down? That's where the alcohol might play into a health
All right.
and fitness.
Thank you.
That's what I was just thinking.
Before we, go ahead. Before we have any further conversation, I want to do what I did the last time because I know, because we've heard from so many of you, that it is important for each of you to feel as though you are being heard. And I have discussed this with the planning department about what I'm about to do, so I'm going to ask that if you are a property owner, and you are in favor of this text amendment, I'm going to ask you to please stand.
Is this a property owner in the
A
historic
property
district?
owner in the historic district. If you are a property owner in the historic district, I'm going to ask that you stand, and Mr. Renfro is going to get a count, so please do not sit down just yet. And if I have any residents in there who are not property owners, sit tight. I'm going to include you too in a minute. All right, please be seated. If you are a property owner in the historic district and you are in opposition of this, please stand. Property owners in opposition, please remain standing. Now, if you'll all have a seat, we're going to do one more vote because we've heard from lots of people, but the property owners, I wanted to have a distinct count. Anyone in this audience who is in favor of this request, please stand. And stay standing. This is anyone in the audience who is in favor. So we have a lot of folks standing who are not property owners. This is done? All right. Have a seat. Okay. Anyone who is opposed to this, please stand. And I'm doing this, you ready? Have a seat. Because, and I'll use myself as a personal example. I don't own any property in the Liberty District. I have never worked in the Liberty District. I don't have family that lives in the Liberty District, and I don't own property there. But I care about what happens to the Liberty District. So I show up for those sorts of things. So that's why it was important for me for you all, sitting up here as well, and for the audience to see, we do have a general public population that feels as though they want to hear a voice. But by the same token, I think it is important that we also understand who our property owners are and where they stand. Commissioners, Mr. Brennan.
I would like to ask a question of the applicant. If we do amend it to restrict alcohol sales on this, is that a deal breaker for you?
And if
you're not interested in changing the definition as it applies to a whole, it can be a condition of the special exception if the text amendment's approved.
Right.
Or could we just add it to that, where we're adding that extra section?
You mean like a section D?
Where we were going to add it to, hold on a second, let me get where we're going to do it. Where we were going to add something, where we are creating 3.2.73.
Uh-huh.
And it's got all the extra conditions about 15,000 feet, existing structures. I was going to add a letter D saying no on or off-premise alcohol sales will be permitted.
I'd just say no alcohol
no
sales.
alcohol
Whatever,
sales, period.
Yeah, just
Whatever.
Because
But I mean-
we
But
got
he can-
off-premise, on-premise, restaurant, family style. I'd rather not get into all of that.
Okay, that's fine, no alcohol sales. But what I'm trying to get at is the person that made the application who's going to
Right.
have this come
Right.
forward again, does that cause?
Our understanding is it's not, but please state your name and address.
It's Joanne Kogel, 732 Second Avenue in the Historic District. I have no intention of selling alcohol.
So it's not a deal breaker for you?
No.
Okay,
no.
that's all we needed to know.
Yeah, no, it's not a deal breaker.
Okay. Okay.
and
No,
just-
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, Will's about to.
I wouldn't say sales after what Fred said. I wouldn't say sales. I'd say no.
Alcohol provisions.
Provided or
provided,
whatever. I
yeah.
wouldn't say sales because
What if they just give
you're
it to
not
you?
running a C-store out of there, so
So not
wouldn't have
allowed to
off-premise
provide,
sales.
no, not allowing to provide alcohol.
I'm just going, when it comes to it, I'm going to
Right.
use the phrase no alcohol, and if there's some legalese that needs to be
Let us
wordsmithed by
know.
the city attorney, the intent is no alcohol will be
Right.
located in a health and fitness facility
Right,
in the historic district, period.
Okay.
Whether it's on-premise, off-premise, consumption, non-consumption, whatever, no alcohol in this. Well, when we get to that, or if someone's
Gotcha.
going to make that.
yeah. Are there any other questions? No other questions up here? All right, do I hear a motion? I believe I do.
Okay, I can make it. In the case of REZN-01-19-0007, a text amendment change to the UDO with regards to requesting amendment to table 3.1.1, whereas health and fitness facility will be added as a special exception, and then the creation of 3.2.73 and the subsequent text provided publicly. I also add under letter A, a letter D saying no alcohol in a health and fitness facility, subject to whatever additions or corrections the city attorney needs to make to imply no alcohol in a facility in the historic district.
And I
That's
may
my
have missed this, but yours is approval of it, is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, yes, approval thereof.
I thought that's what you're saying. Do I hear a second? All right. All of those in favor, please raise your right hand. All right, hang on. Keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 in favor. All of those opposed? 1, 2, 3 opposed. So this will go forward with a recommendation for approval to City Council. And that brings us to the end of our cases. We have another meeting, or let me back up. You guys have another meeting, April 3rd. After 7 years of serving the Planning and Advisory Commission, I roll off, as does Mr. Kenner, at the end of the month. So,
Madam Chair?
yes.
I think it's appropriate that we ask our guests with us today to rise with us and give you a round of applause for being such an amazing leader for the team here.
Thank you. I was not expecting that. Thank you. I'm going to miss being up here with you guys. This is a great team. Ralph King down here will be chairing this commission in the coming years, and Mr. Bollinger will be the vice chair, and I leave you all in good hands.
Madam Chair, one thing.
Yeah.
This means I get no more emails from you.
No more emails from me. Aren't you sad? No more emails from me. I'm sure Will and John and Rick will be thrilled to see me go. Thank you, and we are adjourned.